for joining me on the podcast today. I'm really excited to get to talk to you. I love to start just hearing a bit about your story and how did your fascination with Indian mythology spark?
I think language was always a great love of mine. I did fairly well in school in various subjects, but language and literature was really my passion. Communication, in that sense, communication through narrative. And so I started a degree at the University of Toronto eons ago, over 25 years ago, in artsy fartsy subjects such as English literature with a minors in history and philosophy. And then 2 years later, I dropped out because life happened. But I came back to school and I discovered I can do uh, narrative, literature, and history and philosophy of South Asia. But the only way to do that was through religious studies, perhaps these days South Asian studies, because of our obvious cultural bias. Every culture has its bias, and so it took me a while to realize that my interest for my master's on the Valmiki Ramayana was because of narrative. I was studying the story of Rama. It took me some time to consciously realize I had a passion for communicating, understanding, and telling stories, studying story. It took me a long time to realize that. Only until 2016 when I started a platform called Power of Myth. It was the precursor to my current Indian wisdom school that I consciously realized that in many ways I'm a mythologist or someone who makes sense of story, and that stories make sense of life.
Interesting. And did you know much about them before you went to university? Was this part of your life, or was this something you discovered when you started studying?
Yeah, I did not. I always enjoyed good stories in terms of novels and, of course, movies and this and that. And I always understood them at a level that others didn't. And I would say something about the story that was obvious to me, but it was sort of jaw dropping to someone else. Or someone would tell me bits about their life, and I would understand their life story in an extraordinarily deep way. So pattern recognition through storytelling is a superpower of mine. In terms of Indic stories in particular, I really wasn't entirely exposed to them, although I came from a remotely Hindu home. I wasn't exposed to them in earnest until my master's and my PhD studies, really. I did a PhD on the Devi Mahatmya, the central great goddess story of ancient India. And so the Puranas themselves, I mean, the epics, every person of Indic background knows the story of Rama or parts of the epics. It's like the story of Moses or the story of Jesus Christ in a Western context. Everyone knows those stories. But the Puranas, snippets here and there, but really in my graduate work, did I really in earnest pay attention to the Puranas.
Mm, interesting. You've also talked about having quite a rich, long spiritual practice as well. Was it this academic study and finding out about the narratives and learning that inspired you to dive into the spiritual side, or how did that arrive?
Yeah, well, I'd say in the 2003-ish when I had left school, I was pretty much raised in Toronto, a very Western mind, Indic background, and it wasn't until then I discovered I had a very Indic soul, and I was very much seeking. And I picked up a book on mantras, and I remembered some mantras from the home environment, and I was doing daily spiritual practice. And within a year, I discovered the academic study of Hinduism. I discovered that course the day it began in 2004, September. And then from that course, I actually ended up meeting my spiritual teacher. A year later, the woman who taught the course did so because the professor who was supposed to teach it was on maternity leave. And when the course was done, we became good colleagues. And she knew someone who ran a yoga studio. And at the yoga studio, my cave dwelling urban, my urban cave dwelling master was giving satsangs on the Bhagavad Gita and the Yoga Sutras. And my spiritual teacher in Toronto, he was in Toronto for 40 years or so. He was there till he knew he was about to pass, and he went to India to pass in about 2017. So I had 12 years or so in his fine care, learning spiritually, most heavily during the years of my master's program, 2007, 2010. So I joke to myself, it was the masters and the master and work. That was my life in those days.
It's beautiful. Did you, because so my academic background is a Bachelor of Science, so it's like very like academic in terms of and structured, I suppose, in the way that things get discussed. So it might be different in the Bachelor of Arts, but is there like any kind of disconnect in terms of the academic analysis of like spiritual discussions, or how have they kind of tied together in your understanding of everything?
So the academic study of religion, like most academic enterprises, is just that. It's using very much the left brain to understand what we can understand empirically. That is the nature of the academy. So it's quite different in religious studies than maybe theology, which is more faith-based, making sense of a tradition from within. As I am a Christian, I take prima facie what the Gospels say, and how do I philosophize or theologize from within the faith. That is very different from religious studies, which is very much from an outsider, quote unquote, objective perspective. Of course, we can critique or color what we mean by objective, but very much spirituality was not only not part of the equation of academic study, it was in many academic circles denigrated or held with suspicion. And I think that was the case for most religious studies departments in those days. And I think some more than others. The University of Toronto certainly was quite a sanitized department, shall we say. But there were other certain traditions where, perhaps it wouldn't be as eyebrow raising if someone was invested in a Christian paradigm as with a Hindu paradigm, for example. So the certain traditions was a bit more acceptable because of cultural biases to be practicing and studying. At times, there was a prejudice that those who were practicing could not be or would not be objective in their analysis. But in either case, when one is engaged in academic enterprise, one is engaged in an enterprise that anyone with some critical thinking and some interest could follow, right? So a literary study on the Devi Mahatmya, the glories of the goddess, is very different from, hey, let me show you how to use this text to raise your Kundalini Shakti. These are different enterprises. So I have two favorite analogies. One is with music, the other is with food. Music history and music theory is very different from apparently performance or rhythm and pitch and dance. And, it's like religious studies is like being a nutritionist without ever tasting and often not even believing that there is such a thing as taste.
Yeah, that's an interesting way of putting it, and you can kind of like visualize that. And was it ever hard with your academic stuff to separate the two once you have like developed this, or it's just like you sort of tap into that line of thinking now that you're stepping into this role of
It,
academic?
I had a naturally inquisitive and intellectual mind. Like mind worked well, and understanding, understanding the world in terms of causes and mundane factors, that was just instinctive to me. That made sense to me, and I always did well in school and always had questions that could be answered in those terms. It wasn't until maybe 2020, 2003 or so that I started seeking more than understanding. I was always philosophical and spiritual in my own way, but I was seeking sort of capital T truth more than seeking information about mundane reality, which is really, really important. And methods for making sense of mundane reality, which is very, very important. But this is the kindergarten of spirituality. Spirituality is about understanding on a much deeper and broader perspective than understanding things in a mundane way. And I think that understanding the lane you're called to drive in. If you're looking for an academic outcome, you need to stay in an academic lane to get there expediently. And if you're looking for a spiritual outcome, you need to stay in your spiritual lane. And a lot of people do a lot of commingling, much to the detriment of themselves, their spirituality, and their scholarship. If we have a scholarly outlook and a scholarly question, we want to know the history or the compositional epoch of a text such as the Devi Mahatmya, the Greatness of the Goddess. That is a particular question that can be answered through scholarship. If we wish to understand the spiritual power of the Devi Mahatmya, that will not be answered through scholarship. So we need to understand if we're after intellectual enterprise or experiential enterprise. And it's important that one not trespass on the other.
Mm. It's interesting that you keep them both separate.
They cross pollinate. They do cross pollinate. They're not. they're not mutually exclusive. They cross pollinate, but understanding that there is a time space mundane reality and there's a reality beyond the physical reality, or even in humanity's level. Certainly, we have human conditioning, we have hardware, and we have software. Absolutely. But there is Wi Fi, there is an internet, there is electricity. We may not be able to see it through hardware and software. Understanding that they cross pollinate. But if I'm going to make an argument about spirituality, I don't need to do poor science or pseudoscience. And if I'm going to make an argument about materiality, I don't need to trespass upon spirituality. It's important to understand whether we're trying to understand physical reality or spiritual reality. And anyone who thinks the latter doesn't exist is not paying
Mm.
attention,
Yeah.
is not paying attention to various phenomena within all cultures known to us since we crawled out of caves. And more importantly, is not paying attention to their very
Mm.
self.
Yeah, I suppose it comes down to understanding the hypothesis, like what actually is your hypothesis and which lane do you need to approach that from. Um,
Exactly.
you've said that the stories we tell are the tissues of our consciousness. Can you unpack that a little bit for us?
Certainly. I think the notion of sort of unadulterated or pure consciousness, or what is equated in Indic thought with Satchitananda existence, um, truth and bliss, that supreme consciousness, that might be very esoteric or abstract for most. So we can certainly relate to the idea that I may have a consciousness that is conditioned differently from yours, from someone else's. Perhaps we in a particular group, an enterprise, a sports team, a certain club, a certain hobby, a certain class, those of us in a yoga class, we have consciousness that is similar compared to those who are not. So conditioned consciousness we understand all too well, because the conditioning of consciousness is the very building blocks of the human experience, the ways in which our awareness is conditioned. And our awareness is conditioned by the stories we tell, by the stories we hear, by the stories we believe about the world, about each other, about ourselves. So one of the things that I do, one of the lanes or one of the pieces of the Dr. Raj Pai is one-on-one life coaching, life guidance, spiritual counsel work. And it is extraordinary to watch someone shift when we identify the story they're telling about themselves, that they didn't realize they're telling about themselves, that may or may not be true in an objective self. And when they shift the story they're telling about themselves, their all the culture shift, their body language shifts, their decisions shift. So if society tells you consciously or unconsciously you are less valuable because X, you are now telling yourself that, typically on a subconscious level, sometimes on a conscious level. But it doesn't matter what you say to yourself consciously. This is why self-help books have limited traction. They can affect some information, but they can rarely affect transformation, because we all know on a conscious level what we need to do or not do. But on the subconscious level, this is encoded by the stories we have been told and the stories we are telling. And when we tell ourselves we are not worthy or we don't belong or we are not valuable, the rest of our life follows suit. So the story we're telling ourselves about ourselves is the very, metaphorically speaking, tissues of our behaviors. This is what our behaviors stem from, what we believe. What we believe has little to do with objective reality and everything to do with subjective storytelling. And the stories that we're caught up in, these are what we're here to see through, to break through, to rewrite, to not just be palettes upon which others may inscribe their stories for their welfare, to not just be supporting characters in someone else's journey, but to be protagonists in our own right, to be authors in our own right, which means to rewrite the stories we were told.
What is the first step to trying to rewrite those from your perspective?
One cannot treat an issue without properly diagnosing it. And so the very first step to addressing, ameliorating, altering, authoring a story that you're caught up in is registering the story you're caught up in, but you can't see it. See, millions of us situated in the Western world are caught up in a very, very ancient story that the divine created nature for our welfare and for our use and abuse. It's a story, but if we cannot see it as the story that is a civilizational scaffolding, the tissue not just of our consciousness, but our collective consciousness, if we can't confront it as one of many stories we can tell about Mother Earth, if we cannot register that story, then we cannot change that story. Instead, we'll create beautiful, powerful movies like Interstellar, which give us permission to piss on the planet and then leave it for a new planet, because who needs to save the Earth? We'll just piss on a new one, because the very same culture which destroyed the Earth is the very one that'll plant a new civilization with its own flag, and who cares about the wisdom traditions who were telling us to do something different? It's a story. They're making a story that resonates with people based on the story they're living. They're validating. It feels good. Yeah, this feels right. This is our story.
Mm. That this reminds me of, I'll have to check because I can't remember the author's name off the top of my head, but they have a book, How to Live Like a Modern Caveman. And they're both evolutionary biologists. And so they talk about like genetic biology, evolution. But one of the big things that they talk about is like how societies evolve. And basically, what you're saying with this shared consciousness, and that is how we evolve on a different layer, like that's how our culture evolves effectively, is through these shared cultural beliefs and stories.
100%. The stories that we inherited from our civilizational scaffolding, from Genesis and Exodus, whether we're Muslim, Jew, Buddhist, Hindu, whatever, that's not the order of analysis. We have developed a culture which is an evolute of these civilizational stories that unconsciously inform us about the ultimate, the beginning, where we are. There's only one physicist among many extraordinarily brilliant people, men and women, who has begun to think of, we have really huge, really ancient galaxies. Maybe there was a universe before the Big Bang. Oh, Sir Roger Penrose. Maybe the universe is cyclical. That is heresy, because we're caught up in a story. I'm not saying scientists are relying on mythology. I'm saying they're unconsciously imprinted by it. We're caught up in a story where there must have been a beginning and we're in the middle and it'll end. And unless you come from a different cultural tradition, unthinkable is it that we're actually one of an unending sequence of cycles without beginning and without end. Unconsciously, subconsciously, these stories impact us on a civilizational level and an interpersonal level and a personal level. And when you understand the story that's gripped you, you reclaim your power to not just be part of that story, but to reshape that story, to author that story. When you understand that you are not a character in civilization story or someone else's story, you are the author of your own story. This is self-realization.
I have always thought the Big Bang was a bit of a ridiculous story
It is
because
obviously a
it's just
ridiculous
like,
story.
it's like we don't know what the answer is before that, so boom, and then it started.
It makes
It's like a write off.
you know, as an armchair
Yeah.
physicist or intellectual in that field, it makes perfect sense when you trace what we can observe now and you do the math. It makes sense that things converge up to a tiny amount of time. It all makes sense, and then none of it really makes sense, because we have to account for quantum theory. We have to, all the clocks melt, so to speak, and time itself, the ultimate clock, melts. But it's inconceivable to most that the cosmos need not fit into the left brain. It's inconceivable that we have a right brain for a reason. The right brain function operates differently, and that just like seasons have cycles or are cycles, just like lives are cycles depending on your worldview, maybe the universe itself is a cycle. And that is so yes. So we have everything that we can account for, except that everything came from nothing. because that's supposed to really make sense. Really, we're not supposed to question that. What was there before the Big Bang? Oh, that's the wrong question to ask. Yes, there are those of us who can conceive of the notion that it's like asking what's north of the North Pole, what's before the beginning of time. Of course, but at the same time, you know, everything came from nothing. Is that what you expect us to believe? And all of this order came from ultimate chaos. Is that what you expect us to believe? Get a grip and try again, because it doesn't matter how well the math works, it needs to tally on some level with experience.
Mm, yeah. What do the Indic philosophies say? I'm not all the way through your book, but I can see that there is that cyclical, there's like creation and destruction and
So, yeah, Indic thought, and just to be clear, I'm not advocating that cosmology, modern scientific cosmology, um, be limited to any cultural mythological idea, but I think that there are mythological ideas that can be quite useful to modern cosmology. I think modern cosmology is subconsciously influenced by a Genesis myth, by the myth Genesis. It all started with a big bang. All we need is God calling the Big Bang into being, and we're done. Having said that, within an Indic paradigm, there is this wisdom of cycles and circles, not straight lines. It looks like a straight line. My desk is perfectly straight. The building is straight. It looks straight. The street is straight. But if you pay careful attention, the straight line that appears to be straight is actually part of a curve, which is the curvature of the face of the earth. So that's a beautiful metaphor that I like to draw people's attention to, that time appears linear. We experience it in a linear sense, but it's actually cyclical. And Indic cosmology states that at the beginning of creation, oh, wait, there's no real beginning, because the beginning was preceded by the destruction of the last creation. Well, what do you mean? Well, at the end of days, Shiva dissolves all things in his Ananda Tandava, his glorious, rapturous dance of bliss, and through his divine inebriation, all are dissolved in the primordial ocean, the ocean of potential, if you like, the quantum field. And all are dissolved into that ocean of potential, and then Brahma creates anew. And this is the cosmic heartbeat over billions of years. Creation, expansion, contraction, dissolution. So endless cycles, endless cycles. There is no beginning. It's ananta. It's unending. It's anadi. It's beginningless. Not that we can't count that high, because Hindu cosmology comes up with numbers in the trillions. Literally. They're thinking on these bizarre scales that ironically or perhaps fittingly fit what we know to be true of cosmological time versus Abrahamic thought, which conceives of the world as somewhere between 6,000 and 7,000 years old, versus what the Hindus are saying, millions and billions and in some cases trillions. So they have these vast swaths of time, but ultimately they defer to a notion of numberlessness. All there is this field of potential, the cosmic ocean upon which Vishnu slumbers on his serpent couch. I mean, this is like an acid trip vision. There's not enough acid in the world for you to come up with this yourself. A cosmic ocean, the Lord Vishnu into sleep on his serpent couch. And from his navel a lotus appears, and the lotus gives birth to the creator anew, who creates a new cosmos from the primordial ocean. Are there enough shrooms in the world
yeah, I
for
was just
that
thinking, how much
image?
ayahuasca do you need to take for that trip? You can't make this stuff up.
Soma, more like it, but yeah. You can't make
It's a
this
great
stuff up.
story. Can't wait to embellish it. So this is like we've gone very like large scale here and like the entire creation. Coming back to that idea of you understanding your own personal stories, how can understanding this idea of the continual creation and understanding some of the messaging behind mythology help you unpack your own stories that are holding you back to recreate anew?
So we are all endeavoring, like Brahma, to create a cosmos, to create a universe, a life, if you will, a future. However, if cycles persist, then the future is no different from the past. What we need to do to really and truly create a free future is break free from the cycles of the past. So when we see that, oh my God, doesn't matter how well dressed I get, I end up in the same bloody gutter every Friday night or every whatever social gathering or every job interview. I'm in the same gutter, no matter how well dressed I become, no matter how many degrees I get, no matter how many languages I learn. Well, what is this path to this gutter? What is it in my blind spot that's allowing me to repeat against my will these patterns of the past? So you, all of you who are listening, are well aware that there are patterns of your past which persist, which you prefer to not persist, patterns of what you do, what you say, what you eat, what you drink, what you attract, whom you attract. And the pattern persists because of subconscious storytelling. And when you can become aware of that, typically with support, if you know a good therapist or what have you, or some kind of weirdo spiritual coach in Toronto, whoever, someone in your life, maybe even an inspirational TED talk, or maybe a good friend, a parent. Well, you have to be a certain age to listen to your parents. They're dumb for the longest time, then they become smart again until about your mid-20s to about 30, and then it depends on your relationship with them whether you listen to them or not. But my point is, none of us can see our blind spot, and so your patterns of the past persist because of ignorance, because of something of which you are ignorant. And this is why the Indic tradition so gloriously exalts knowledge, consciousness, awareness as a liberating force. That you are trapped by the patterns of the past because you are ignorant of the mechanics of that story that you're caught up in. And when you can shine a flashlight and have your aha moment, that the levity of that aha breaks you free of the gravity of those patterns.
And do you find that learning these stories and learning the mythology can be a trigger to help people like wake up?
10,000%, because mythological stories are actually the building blocks from which personal stories are made. So if we're all unique iterations of art, mythological stories are the band of colors with which we are painted. As unique as we are, we're going to be a unique combination of a specific band of colors. So the mythological stories are the band of colors. This is why they persist. This is why they're enjoyable. They entail love and defeat and triumph and betrayal and addiction and grace, and they are sort of technicolor versions of the human story.
Yeah, cool. And bringing that back into your book. So for anyone that's listening is like, I really want to like learn some of these stories. And I think your book is a beautiful, and well, you actually have multiple books, but the stories are behind the poses. How can people then use these to enhance their yoga practice once they start to learn these stories?
Certainly, the stories the stories behind the poses was actually a response to students. Ultimately, the publisher knocked on my door 2021. I taught a course called Yoga and Hindu Mythology, and one of my students told some stories to her students, and one of her students worked at this publishing house, and they knocked on my door and they said, "Hey, we specialize in illustrated books for adult." And as a scholar, I never in 1,000 years thought I'd write an illustrated book. I mean, I have a couple fantasy novels in me for when I'm a little older. But even then, I never thought they would be illustrated. So I'm like, I didn't plan to write this book, but oh, this is from teaching. This is a teaching tool. Students want this. This is, I'm like, okay, sure, I'll write this book. So these are the mythological stories after which yoga poses are named. What do you mean after which yoga poses are named? Well, great question. Yoga poses are named after mythological stories. FYI. How come no one told me this? I don't know why they didn't tell you. I'm sorry they didn't tell you. but it's akin to yoga poses being created in a Western spiritual religious context and be given names like Moses asana and not knowing, and then they're translated into like Hindi as like as I don't know, as outstretch pose. They're not called Moses asana. They're called outstretch pose. And someone's like, outstretch pose. And they look up, it's Moses asana. Who's Moses? Oh, it's when he was stretching his arms out. Ah, as an instrument of God on high, to part the Red Sea for his blessed people, to escape Pharaoh's wrath after 400 years of bondage. You think this is relevant to outstretch pose? To Moses asana? Of course it is. Of course it is. But what if you had a very similar possible called cross pose? And cross pose, cool, yay, cross, like CrossFit. No, when you look it up in the original, it's crucifix asana. Like crucifix asana. Well, what crucifix? The crucifix, the cross upon which Jesus Christ was crucified. What might that mean? Maybe outstretch pose and cross pose look similar. Moses asana and crucifix asana. Would they have a different mood, mindset, mentality? Of course they would. Would they be tapping a different story and a different consciousness, a different tissue sample, if you will? Of course they would. That's what the book's about.
Great book. I'm really
Helping you
enjoying
understand.
it. It's yeah, that makes sense. And for yoga teachers, because everyone listening here is pretty much a yoga teacher, if they want to start incorporating these stories into their classes, how do you recommend like they start to do that? Because they're quite
Sure.
long. You can't really
Yeah,
tell the
yeah. That's
story while
well,
they're in one posture.
well. That's an excellent question. I would say for yoga teachers listening, if Indian spirituality, mythology, philosophy is not your thing, that's okay. As long as you're not pretending they don't exist, because your students might be interested. If that's not your thing, that's okay. You don't need to be involved in any of this to be a great yoga teacher. As long as you understand that, okay, there might be students who are interested in the philosophy and the mythology and the spirituality, and you can send them to other podcasts or other wisdom teachers such as myself or what have you. If this is of interest to you, the book was written as a resource to students and to teachers. It was written in a way to be uttered aloud. So it has great energy when you're hearing the sounds in English. So some of my students over the years that have reported back, I founded the Indian Wisdom School online, and so many of my students happen to be yoga teachers. Um, they report either assigning stories outside of class, and students would come in and have a much deeper sense of the posture, or they could tell a tale before they start the asanas. The tales are pretty short and self-contained. There's no other knowledge needed, right? They were created that way. Some people have read them as an opening exercise. Some people read them in shavasana, end of a class, to integrate some of the practice. There are various ways in which you could integrate them. What I would say is I created a series of courses to teach people how to integrate them. This is a companion course at the Indian Wisdom School, indianwisdomschool.com, where that's exactly the question I got for my students a few years ago. How I love this, how can I use this in class? I created that course to answer that question. And I'm not selling anything to you. I'm gifting you with something. If you're interested in that, just go pull up that course. Maybe we'll put it in the podcast notes and use the coupon code Punya, Punya, and you could have that, and you could have those resources, and start implementing the stories as best suits your students.
Yeah, thank you so much for gifting that and the practical advice around how to incorporate them. Because I think there's sometimes people really want to incorporate these, but there's a little bit of resistance into the how because it's not part of a lot of our teacher trainings. Like you mentioned, most people will have the question like, I didn't know these were named after actual myths. I didn't know that until recently, and as well, to be perfectly honest. And then I was like, it makes so much more sense now. So thank you for doing your work and sharing that as well. There's a huge piece that gets missed from a lot of teacher trainings, and often it's the philosophy and the mythology especially that gets bunted out over. You learn all the asanas in there, how to perfect the posture and what they should all look like, and you learn the names of them, but no one mentions it. So thank you for mentioning it.
No one mentions what the names mean. No, you're welcome. You're welcome, and it's understandable that in an industry that's particularly catered towards those looking for fitness or relaxation, or maybe relieving some kind of physical um, maladies, that the yoga teacher trainings in Western contexts very much emphasize the biomechanics, and various other elements. And as for the philosophy and spirituality and mythology, um, there are resources, or at least I hope there might be, for those who want to reach out. By all means, folks can study with me at the Indian Wisdom School if you feel called to. Um, there's all kinds of courses there that might help. Um, yeah, there is a yoga stream. I think the yoga stream primarily would be the courses related to yoga teacher needs, but also it's an ocean, right? It's a lot for yoga teachers to be confronted with, the ocean of philosophy and spirituality, mythology. It's just such an ocean, and there's no need, teach with integrity, teach with care, gain some competence, make sure you trust the person you're studying with for your YTT, and then the YTT is the bare bones, right? So it's like you've gotten your whatever degree, and you want to do subsequent degrees of professional development. From what I understand from my students, there's no shortage of folks out there teaching on the philosophy. I don't know many teaching on the mythology, frankly, and I think there's a little bit of a need there. Certainly, I do. There might be others as well. I'm not at all saying come to me, I will save you. What I'm saying is, I hope there's resources out there for you, and you can seek them out, because I know how overwhelming it is when you come out with your 200 hour, and there's so much. And I've had people straight out of the gate, they're like, my students are asking me these questions, I don't know how to answer them. I'm like, well, listen, these are not straightforward questions. It's not as if you should be expected to answer these questions, but make sure that you have people in your field that you can send students to or study yourself with, and I
Yeah, I
think you'll be
think
okay.
that's one of the keys is being able to express that there is more to the practice than maybe the physical side that you've primarily learned, and being able to pass people on to into directions that if they want to learn more, because it's a huge topic, and like you can go down so many different avenues. Like you could spend a lifetime just on learning mantra or mudra or something. Like there's
And
so
and
much.
it gets worse, Adrian. You could spend multiple
This is true.
lifetimes.
It's true on just one of them. And then you have the academic lane you could go down, or the spiritual lane. They're both separate lifetimes in their own right as well.
There you go.
Uh, awesome. Thank you so much. I do have a few rapid fire questions for you before we wrap up
Sure, why
today.
not? Okay,
So I know
I'm
you
ready.
studied Sanskrit, and language is a big passion
Mm,
of yours. Do you have any favorite word or phrase, and why?
That's an oceanic question. It's like asking for a favorite piece of coral in the coral reef and beyond. What I would say is the word dharma comes to mind. Dharma is an extraordinarily rich and an extraordinary useful and relevant term. If you can begin to begin to understand dharma, you can live a well life lived, and you can counteract the tumult of our times with this one concept. Because encoded in this concept is a sense of duty, is a sense of meaning, is a sense of purpose, is a sense of righteousness, and it's based on an even more ancient word from Vedic times called Vrita, which means cosmic order. So learning about Dharma is learning about a life well lived.
And second one, so if there is like one asana that you think benefits from learning the mythology in the grandest sort of transformational way, which one would you say?
Again, so many, and the supplement will always depend upon your goals or your deficiencies, right? So the asanas, the story will illumine the asana, but the best asana for you will depend upon your circumstance. But in this moment, two come to mind, one in particular. It's the one with which the stories behind the poses begins. It is Siddhasana. Siddha means perfection. It is perfection pose. Whether or not you can embody perfection pose physically, the story behind perfection pose is the story of Ganesha, Lord of Wisdom, Lord of Auspicious Beginnings, and the story of how, when asked to race around the world, and how he devised an innovative, creative solution, he gained perfect wisdom. So I feel that while many of the poses might be a means, Siddhasana might in certain ways be the end, the perfect sitting for the reception of wisdom.
Nice. You said there were two postures that came to mind.
We'll leave it with Siddhasana, but Shavasana also is very powerful. Shavasana is much, much, much more than lying there. There's a deep witnessing component. There is for you to integrate the practice, or for Shavasana, for Shavasana to work, for the mechanics of it to be optimal, one needs to begin to tap the witness consciousness. As your awareness abides more and more in the witness consciousness, then there's more bandwidth for the processing to happen in your mundane leisure self.
And my last question is, if you could pass on
Yes, anything.
one lesson from your spiritual master, what would it be?
It's detachment. Detach yourself. Detachment is the essence of spirituality. Do not be fooled by those who peddle detachment as aloofness or escapism. Detachment itself is born of extraordinary compassion. We care deeply. But in detachment, we don't care on an ego level. We care on a soul level. So from detachment, we can act without harming ourselves and others, and without accruing additional karma. All of the machinations of our world are designed, particularly present, to stoke, encourage, inspire great attachment on your part. And for the most part, that energy that's being sucked out of you is vented needlessly and wasted. Detach yourself. Let the world be what the world needs to be. These are extraordinarily dark times. Do you wish to be sucked into the black hole, as they would like? Kindle your flames. Find other light wielders. This is what you do in dark times. Let the darkness be what the darkness will be, but kindle your flame.
Wow. Thank you. That's a beautiful way to end. And I appreciate this conversation so much. It's been fascinating. It's an amazing way to start my day. So there's a lot you've left me to contemplate for the rest of the day. And I appreciate this so much. And if people would like to learn from yourself and your school more, where can they find you and connect with you?
Absolutely. Come study with me at indianwisdomschool.com. Go have any course you want entirely as a gift. Punya, Punya. Feel free to join. And if you want to know about me in general, you can go to rajbalkaran.com. The wisdom teachings is one of the lanes in which I drive, but apparently I get around. So rajbalkaran.com will share a bit more about the various other facets of my work in the world. Thank you very much for the
Oh,
opportunity.
thank you so much. And I will have that in the show notes for everyone as well, so they can go and find that. I highly recommend everyone to go check that out and check out your book as well if they're interested in mythology. I am absolutely loving reading that, and it's very easy to read, I find as well. So thank you. Thank you so much, and thank you for
You're
joining me
welcome.
today. I really, really appreciate it.
My pleasure.